The ATV jolted hard when my front tires dropped from open pasture onto fresh asphalt. I had bought 2,500 acres of ranchland 3 weeks earlier, and now a paved neighborhood street was cutting through the middle of it like it had always belonged there. A green HOA cart rolled toward me before I even reached the first mailbox. Behind it, sprinkler heads hissed across lawns planted on my property. Streetlights lined both sides of the road, feeding from a utility easement tied to the main access gate I now owned. Then I saw the entrance sign, Oak Ridge Meadows. The HOA had not just crossed a boundary. They had built a whole life on the wrong side of it. A woman in a cream blazer stepped out of the golf cart and raised one hand like she was stopping traffic. The engine beneath me ticked in the heat. Fresh-cut grass mixed with the smell of dust and hot rubber. Behind her, a row of tan houses sat along a curving street, each with matching mailboxes and trimmed hedges. Children's bicycles leaned against driveways. A lawn mower buzzed 2 lots away. It looked normal enough to make the situation worse. Normal meant people lived here. Normal meant records had failed somewhere. Normal meant this was not going to be simple. I shut off the ATV and climbed down slowly. Gravel dust clung to my jeans. The woman kept walking toward me with a clipboard tucked against her side. Her sunglasses reflected my own face back at me. "Sir," she said, crisp and controlled. "This is private community property." I looked past her at the street sign bolted into the ground. Red Fox Lane. That name did not appear anywhere in my purchase file. Neither did the drainage culvert beside it. Neither did the power pedestal humming near the ditch. I pointed toward the pasture behind me. "This road sits inside my ranch." Her smile tightened. "Not much. Just enough." "You are mistaken." That was the first thing Linda Crawford ever said to me after claiming my land as hers. I did not know her name yet, but I knew the type. Polished. Certain. Used to people stepping aside when she spoke. 2 more golf carts arrived behind her. Men in polo shirts. A woman filming with her phone. A teenager stopped his bike near the curb and stared. The whole neighborhood seemed to sense conflict before anyone raised their voice. My pulse slowed instead of speeding up. That always happens when a situation gets serious. I am Cole Harrison, 47 years old, former forestry engineer. I spent years reading land surveys, timber plats, watershed maps, and access corridors across the American West. Lines on paper were not decorations to me. They were ownership, liability, history, consequences. I pulled the folded deed map from the storage box on my ATV. The paper crackled in the warm air. Linda glanced at it like I had handed her a fast food receipt. "Our HOA has maintained this neighborhood for 22 years, she said. "You cannot just drive in here and invent a claim." A garage door opened nearby. Someone whispered from a porch. The mower shut off. Silence moved across the street in pieces. I unfolded the map and turned it toward her. The southern boundary of my ranch ran directly through the street under our feet. Linda did not look at the line. She looked at the people watching us. Then she lowered her voice. "You need to leave before this becomes a legal problem." A legal problem. Standing there between her HOA cart and my property line, I realized the neighborhood was only the surface. Then the first sheriff's deputy turned onto Red Fox Lane. The sheriff's deputy rolled to a stop beside the curb and left the engine running. Sunlight flashed across the windshield. Nobody spoke for a moment. The neighborhood had gone strangely quiet. Even the teenager with the bicycle stayed put. Linda folded her arms and looked toward the patrol vehicle as if she had expected it. That detail stayed with me. The deputy stepped out slowly. The smell of warm asphalt drifted through the air. A sprinkler clicked rhythmically somewhere behind the houses. He adjusted his hat and approached us without urgency. That told me this was not an emergency call. This was something else. Linda greeted him by name before he said a word. Another detail. Another piece that did not fit. I stood beside my ATV holding the folded map while the deputy listened to both sides. He remained polite, professional, careful. The residents gathering along the sidewalks watched every movement. Several phones were already recording. Nobody wanted a solution. They wanted a spectacle. When Linda finished speaking, the deputy turned toward me. I handed him the survey map. The paper fluttered slightly in the breeze. He studied it for several seconds. His eyes moved from the document to the street sign and back again. Then he handed it back. "This looks like a civil matter," he said. Exactly the answer I expected. Property disputes rarely get solved on the side of a road. The deputy suggested everyone remain calm and contact the county records office if ownership questions existed. Linda smiled the moment he said that. Not a friendly smile. A relieved one. She believed the conversation was over. It was not. The deputy left a few minutes later. The neighborhood slowly came back to life. Garage doors opened. Conversations resumed. Lawn equipment started again. But people kept watching me. Every porch felt occupied. Every window seemed to have a face behind it. I climbed back onto the ATV and drove slowly through the community. Nobody stopped me now. The tires hummed against the pavement. Mailboxes lined the street in perfect rows. Decorative streetlights stood every 100 feet. Small parks appeared between clusters of homes. Everything looked permanent. That was the problem. Temporary mistakes do not usually come with sidewalks and drainage systems. I stopped near a retention pond at the far end of the neighborhood. Ducks floated across the water. A fountain sprayed into the air. Beyond it stood another sign displaying the Oak Ridge Meadows logo. The HOA had invested serious money here. Millions, probably. My eyes followed the utility poles running toward the northern ridge. Then I noticed something. The main power line crossed directly through a corridor marked on my ranch survey. Not beside it. Through it. I pulled the map from my storage box again and compared the alignment. The corridor connected to an access route running across several hundred acres. The same route controlled utility entry into the back section of the property. A small observation. An important observation. Suddenly the neighborhood looked different. Less like an isolated subdivision. More like a piece of something larger. Around sunset, I returned to the ranch house. Dust trailed behind the ATV as I crossed open pasture. The evening air smelled like cedar and dry grass. Inside, I spread every document from the purchase across my dining table. Maps, surveys, easement records, closing reports. The house grew darker as the sun disappeared beyond the hills. Then I noticed a handwritten note in the corner of an old survey packet. The handwritten note sat in the corner of the survey packet in faded blue ink. I leaned closer under the dining room light. The paper smelled old, dusty, like it had spent years inside a forgotten filing cabinet. 3 words were underlined twice. Original boundary review. Beneath them was a date from nearly 24 years earlier. My eyes moved across the page again. Someone had circled a parcel reference number and written, "Verify before development." I stopped reading for a second. The refrigerator hummed softly behind me. Outside, wind brushed against the porch railing. That note should not have existed if everything had been handled correctly. I pulled the matching parcel file from the stack and started comparing numbers. The process took nearly an hour. Maps covered half the table. Survey sheets overlapped one another. Coffee grew cold beside my elbow. Then I found the parcel. The reference number belonged to a section directly beneath Oak Ridge Meadows. Not beside it. Not adjacent to it. Beneath it. The silence inside the house suddenly felt louder. I checked the number again. Same result. Around 9 o'clock the next morning, I drove into town. The county records office occupied a low brick building near the courthouse square. Ceiling fans turned lazily overhead. The lobby smelled faintly of paper and floor polish. A clerk behind the counter looked up when I entered. I gave her the parcel number. Her fingers moved across a keyboard. She frowned almost immediately. Small reaction. Important reaction. Then she asked me to wait. 10 minutes later, she returned carrying 2 folders instead of 1. That was the second clue. The first folder contained modern records. Everything looked normal. Ownership transfers, tax records, development references, standard paperwork. The second folder looked different. Older, thicker. Several pages had yellowed with age. A few documents carried handwritten notes similar to the one I found at home. I spent the next 2 hours reading. The deeper I went, the less confident the records appeared. Certain maps showed one boundary. Later versions showed another. Survey references changed without much explanation. Entire notes vanished between updates. The air conditioning rattled overhead. Pages turned slowly beneath my hands. Then I found Linda Crawford's name. Not on a deed. Not on ownership documents. On HOA incorporation records from more than 2 decades earlier. I copied the page. Then another. Then 3 more. Her name appeared repeatedly. That surprised me. Most HOA presidents rotate every few years. Linda had been connected to Oak Ridge almost from the beginning. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected off parked cars when I finally left the building. I sat in my truck reviewing copies before starting the engine. A lawn service trailer rolled through the intersection. Someone laughed across the street. Normal sounds. Normal day. Yet the neighborhood felt larger now. Not physically larger. More connected. More organized. Like pieces of a machine I had only started to see. Back at the ranch, I spread the new records across the table beside the old survey packet. The similarities jumped out immediately. Certain names repeated. Certain parcel references repeated. Even the same survey company appeared again and again over a span of years. Then I noticed one signature near the bottom of a county review form. The signature belonged to a surveyor, and according to the date beside it, he was still alive. I picked up the phone and wrote down his number. The number rang 4 times before a man answered. His voice sounded rough, older, like someone who had spent decades outdoors. I introduced myself and mentioned the survey reference number. Silence followed. Not confusion. Recognition. I heard a chair creak on the other end of the line. Then he asked where I got the file. I looked across the dining table covered with maps and records. Late afternoon sunlight stretched through the ranch house windows. Dust floated in the air above the paperwork. I told him the truth. County archives. Another long pause. Then he gave me an address. No explanation. No details. Just an address and a time. The next morning I drove nearly 90 miles south. The highway cut through rolling ranch country and patches of scrub oak. Wind buffeted the truck. The smell of dry earth drifted through the open window. Around noon, I turned onto a gravel road lined with weathered fences. At the end sat a small house, shaded by pecan trees. An old pickup truck rested beneath a carport. Survey stakes leaned against a shed. I knew I was in the right place. The man who opened the door looked exactly like someone who had spent a lifetime measuring land. Sun-worn skin, heavy boots, sharp eyes. His name was Frank Delaney. He had signed the county review form 23 years earlier. We sat at a wooden table covered with aerial photographs and folded plats. A ceiling fan spun slowly overhead. Fresh coffee filled the room with its bitter smell. Frank studied the copies I brought without saying much. Every few minutes he would tap one page with a finger or shake his head slightly. Finally he leaned back. I remember this project. Those 4 words changed the entire day. I listened while he traced lines across an old plat map. According to Frank, the development began much smaller than what existed now. A handful of homes. A narrow road. Nothing unusual. Then expansion started. New phases appeared. Additional streets appeared. Boundaries shifted. Each change seemed minor by itself. Together they created something very different. Frank pulled another map from a drawer. The paper crackled as he unfolded it. My eyes immediately locked onto the boundary lines. They matched the older records almost perfectly. Not the modern versions. The older ones. Frank tapped a section near the center. The same section where Oak Ridge Meadows now stood. This review was never finalized, he said. I looked closer. Certain approval boxes remained blank. Several signatures were missing. My pulse slowed again. That feeling had become familiar. Every answer seemed to expose a larger question. Outside, wind rattled tree branches against the roof. Frank continued. Years ago, concerns were raised about parcel alignment and ownership verification. The review process stalled. Personnel changed. Records moved. Then the project kept growing anyway. He did not accuse anyone of wrongdoing. He did not need to. The paperwork spoke loudly enough. Before I left, Frank handed me a photocopy from his personal files. The edges were worn from age. A note had been attached to the top corner decades earlier. Verified before expansion. The exact phrase from the survey packet sitting on my dining table. Same wording. Same concern. Same warning. As I drove back toward the ranch that evening, the sky glowed orange above the hills. The truck tires hummed against the pavement. My phone buzzed near the center console. The caller ID showed Linda Crawford. Linda Crawford's name glowed on the truck display while the highway stretched ahead of me. The sun was dropping toward the horizon. Orange light spilled across the dashboard. I let the phone ring twice before answering. Her voice sounded unusually calm. That caught my attention immediately. Up to that point, every interaction with Linda had carried the sharp confidence of someone protecting territory. This sounded different. More careful. More measured. She asked where I had been all day. Not directly. Indirectly. Through polite questions. Through small talk that did not feel like small talk. I kept my answers short. The truck tires hummed against the pavement. Wind moved through the open window. Then she mentioned the county records office. My grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. I had never told her I went there. She continued speaking as if the comment meant nothing, as if it had slipped into the conversation by accident. It had not. A few miles later, she invited me to attend the next HOA board meeting. According to Linda, she wanted transparency. She wanted cooperation. She wanted everyone working together. The timing felt interesting. Very interesting. We ended the call a few minutes later. Darkness settled across the ranch country as I drove home. By the time I reached the property, stars had begun appearing overhead. The ranch house sat alone against the horizon. Quiet. Familiar. The porch light cast a yellow circle across the gravel. Inside, I spread Frank's documents across the dining table beside everything else. Maps overlapped maps. Notes overlapped notes. Coffee steamed from a fresh mug. The smell filled the room. Then I started building a timeline. Not ownership. Not boundaries. People. Names. Dates. Decisions. The pattern emerged slowly. Linda appeared near the beginning. Then again several years later. Then again during every major expansion phase. Different titles. Different committees. Same person. The clock passed midnight before I finally leaned back. Outside, coyotes called somewhere beyond the ridge. The sound drifted across the pasture. My eyes settled on one specific document. HOA incorporation records. Most people would have ignored them. I did not. The original neighborhood was much smaller than the version standing there now. That detail mattered. The earliest maps showed only a handful of homes. Yet every later expansion seemed to push farther toward the center of the ranch. Almost as if someone believed the boundaries would never be questioned. The next morning I drove through the neighborhood again. Lawn sprinklers sprayed across bright green grass. A delivery truck moved slowly down one of the side streets. Residents waved to each other. Children waited near a bus stop. The community looked peaceful. That was what made the situation so complicated. Most of these people probably had no idea anything was wrong. They bought homes, raised families, paid dues, trusted records, trusted systems, trusted people. Then I noticed a large bulletin board outside the clubhouse. Flyers covered the surface. Community events, neighborhood announcements, board notices. One flyer stood out immediately. Special HOA meeting. Thursday night. Mandatory attendance encouraged. Linda's name appeared at the bottom. I photographed the notice and continued driving. A few minutes later, I stopped near the retention pond. The fountain sprayed steadily into the air. Sunlight reflected off the water. Then my eyes landed on a survey marker partially hidden behind decorative shrubs. Someone had planted landscaping around it years ago. Most people would never notice it. I stepped closer. Dirt covered part of the metal cap. I brushed it away with my boot. A survey identification number appeared beneath the soil. The number matched one from Frank's file. The survey identification number matched Frank Delaney's file exactly. I crouched beside the marker and brushed away more dirt with my hand. The metal cap had been there a long time. Grass roots wrapped around its edges. Decorative shrubs nearly hid it from view. Yet the number remained clear. Permanent. Deliberate. My eyes moved from the marker to the retention pond behind it. Water splashed from the fountain. Ducks drifted across the surface. Residents walked dogs along the path nearby. None of them seemed aware they were passing one of the most important pieces of evidence on the property. I photographed the marker from every angle. Then I compared the image to the copies in my truck. Same number. Same coordinates. Same reference point. The survey marker had not moved. That mattered. Survey markers tell stories. Unlike people, they rarely change their version. By late afternoon, I returned to the ranch house and spread everything across the dining table again. The room had become a command center. Maps covered nearly every surface. Sticky notes marked dates. Strings of connections existed only inside my own head. The smell of coffee lingered constantly now. Outside, wind rattled the porch screen. Then I overlaid Frank's map onto a recent county plat. My eyes followed the alignment point by point. Marker to marker. Corner to corner. The fit was nearly perfect. The modern version drifted away only after the neighborhood expansions began. I checked it again. Same result. Then a third time. Same result. Every path led back to the expansion phases. Not the original homes. Not the original road. The expansions. That detail kept growing larger. Thursday evening arrived faster than expected. Cars filled the Oak Ridge Clubhouse parking lot before sunset. Pickup trucks lined the curb. Golf carts occupied every available space. Through the windows, I could see folding chairs arranged in rows. Residents carried coffee cups and notebooks. The atmosphere felt less like a community gathering and more like a campaign rally. Linda stood near the entrance greeting people. She wore the same polished confidence she always carried. Her smile widened whenever someone approached. I parked near the back and walked inside. Conversations softened when people noticed me. Not completely, just enough. The room smelled like coffee, paper, and fresh paint. A projector screen hung at the front. HOA board members sat behind a long table beneath bright overhead lights. Linda opened the meeting with prepared remarks about community unity and neighborhood stability. Applause followed. Then she began discussing rumors. She never used my name. She did not need to. Everyone understood who she meant. According to Linda, outside claims were creating unnecessary concern. According to Linda, historical records had already been reviewed years ago. According to Linda, Oak Ridge Meadows stood on solid ground. The phrase caught my attention immediately. Solid ground. I glanced down at the survey photograph resting inside my folder. Then Linda displayed a large map on the projector screen. The room grew quiet. Residents leaned forward. My pulse slowed again. The map looked familiar. Very familiar. One boundary line was missing. One boundary line was missing. I stared at the projector screen from the middle row. The room remained quiet. Residents studied the map without noticing the omission. Why would they? Most people never spend hours comparing plats and survey records. They saw roads, lots, property numbers. I saw empty space where a critical line should have been. Linda continued speaking. Her voice carried easily through the clubhouse. She described community growth, responsible planning, decades of successful management. Several people nodded along. Coffee cups rested on folding tables. Pens scratched across notebooks. The projector fan hummed softly near the ceiling. Then Linda pointed toward the northern section of the map. Every expansion phase followed approved. Boundaries, she said. That statement hung in the air for a second. Approved boundaries. Not existing boundaries. Not original boundaries. Approved boundaries. The distinction mattered. I opened my folder and looked down at Frank's copy. My eyes moved between the papers and the screen. Same roads. Same retention pond. Same cul-de-sac. Missing line. The omission was intentional. It had to be. During the question period, several residents asked routine HOA questions. Landscaping budgets. Pool maintenance. Parking concerns. Linda answered each one smoothly. The board members beside her looked relaxed. They expected another ordinary meeting. Then a man near the back raised his hand. Gray hair. Work boots. Quiet demeanor. I had noticed him earlier, but never spoken to him. What about the ownership issue? He asked. The room shifted immediately. Conversation stopped. Chairs creaked. Linda smiled politely. The kind of smile people use when they want a subject to disappear. She explained that outside claims had created confusion, but that historical reviews supported the community's position. Historical reviews. There was that phrase again. The man nodded slowly but did not look convinced. Neither did several others. I stayed silent. That was important. I had learned something during the past few weeks. Every time I pushed, people became defensive. Every time I stepped back, information surfaced on its own. So I listened. Linda eventually ended the discussion and moved to the next agenda item. The meeting concluded 30 minutes later. Residents filtered toward the exits. The smell of coffee and floor cleaner lingered in the room. Small groups formed near the parking lot. Some people looked worried. Others looked annoyed. A few looked curious. Curiosity was useful. As I walked toward my truck, the gray-haired resident approached me. His name was Walter Bishop. He lived in Oak Ridge's original phase. Not one of the newer sections. The original phase. Another detail that mattered. Walter kept his voice low. You are not the first person to ask questions. I stopped walking. Wind moved through the nearby trees. Golf carts rolled across the parking lot. Walter glanced back toward the clubhouse before continuing. Years ago, another surveyor raised concerns about property lines during an expansion proposal. The concerns disappeared. The project continued. Nobody talked about it again. Walter remembered because he attended the meetings. He remembered arguments, delays, missing paperwork. Then he said something even more interesting. The surveyor had kept copies. My attention sharpened immediately. Walter did not know whether the surveyor was still alive. He did not know where the records ended up. But he knew the surveyor's name. I wrote it down on the back of a meeting agenda. Before leaving, Walter pointed toward the map, still glowing faintly through the clubhouse window. "That version always bothered me," he said. Then he drove away. I stood alone beside my truck for several seconds. The night air felt cooler now. Crickets chirped from the grass beyond the parking lot. I looked down at the name Walter had written. The name Walter wrote belonged to a surveyor named Harold Mercer. I sat in my truck beneath the parking lot lights reading it again while residents drove away around me. The clubhouse slowly emptied. Golf carts disappeared into side streets. Porch lights flickered on across the neighborhood. A warm breeze carried the smell of freshly cut grass through the open window. Harold Mercer. The name appeared nowhere in the county files I had reviewed so far. That alone made him interesting. By sunrise the next morning, I was already searching. Coffee steamed beside my keyboard. The ranch house was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. I started with licensing records, then property records, then archived newspaper databases. 2 hours later, I found the first reference. A small article from nearly 20 years earlier. Harold Mercer had publicly questioned a boundary adjustment connected to a residential expansion project. The article was only a few paragraphs long, yet it mentioned something that caught my attention immediately. A disputed review packet. My pulse slowed. Outside, wind moved across the pasture. The same phrase kept appearing. Review packet. Boundary review. Verify before expansion. Different. Documents. Same warnings. I kept digging. Around noon, I found an address linked to Harold's estate. He had passed away several years earlier. That door appeared closed. Then another record surfaced. His daughter still lived nearby. By mid-afternoon, I was driving east through ranch country again. Clouds drifted slowly across the Texas sky. The smell of rain lingered in the air from a storm the night before. The house sat at the end of a gravel lane lined with cedar trees. An older woman answered the door. Her name was Sarah Mercer. I explained who I was and why I had come. The moment I mentioned Oak Ridge Meadows, her expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. She invited me inside. Family photographs covered the walls. Framed survey maps hung in a hallway. The house smelled faintly of old books and coffee. Sarah listened while I explained the situation. When I finished, she disappeared into another room. I heard boxes shifting, cabinet doors opening. Then she returned carrying a worn cardboard file. Dust coated the edges. My attention locked onto it immediately. Her father had kept copies of projects that troubled him. Not every project. Only the ones he worried might cause problems later. Oak Ridge was one of them. We spread the contents across a dining table. Survey notes, correspondence, hand-drawn corrections. My eyes moved rapidly from page to page. Then I found it. A letter dated 19 years earlier. Harold had submitted concerns regarding a proposed expansion boundary. According to his notes, an alignment discrepancy existed between the original parcel description and the revised development plan. The wording sounded technical. The implications were not. Several pages later, I found something even more important. A comparison sketch. One version showed the original boundary. The other showed the revised one. The difference looked small on paper. Only a narrow shift. But across hundreds of acres, that shift changed everything. My stomach tightened slightly. A small line adjustment had pushed future expansion deeper into land that should never have been included. Sarah watched quietly while I studied the documents. She had seen this realization before. Her father apparently reached the same conclusion years earlier. Then she handed me one final envelope. It remained sealed. Harold had marked it with a simple note. Open if questions remain unresolved. The paper crackled in my hands. Late afternoon sunlight stretched across the table. Neither of us spoke. I carefully opened the envelope and pulled out a folded map. One glance told me this was different. One glance told me this was different. The paper was older than everything else in the file. Fold lines cut across the surface. The corners had softened with age. Harold Mercer had drawn notes directly onto the map in red pencil. Not typed notes. Personal notes. Warnings. Questions. Observations. My eyes moved across the page while late afternoon sunlight stretched through Sarah's dining room window. Then I saw the original boundary. It ran exactly where Frank Delaney's documents said it should. Exactly where the hidden survey marker said it should. Exactly where the missing line on Linda's presentation map should have appeared. The room felt very quiet. A clock ticked somewhere down the hallway. Sarah watched my expression carefully. She did not ask what I found. She already knew. Her father had spent years worrying about the same problem. I photographed every page before leaving. The drive back to the ranch felt shorter somehow. Wind pushed against the truck. Clouds gathered over the western horizon. Every few miles I glanced toward the folder resting on the passenger seat. The map changed the entire picture. Not because it proved ownership by itself, because it connected everything. The survey marker, the county records, Frank's files, Walter's memories, the missing boundary line. For the first time, all the pieces pointed in the same direction. By the time I reached home, rain had started falling. Water tapped against the porch roof. Lightning flashed far beyond the hills. I spread the documents across the dining table again and began building a master timeline. Dates filled several sheets of paper. Expansion phases, survey reviews, HOA records, boundary adjustments, public filings. My coffee grew cold twice before I noticed. Hours passed. Then, something unexpected appeared. The largest expansion phase occurred less than 6 months after Harold Mercer submitted his concerns. I checked the dates again. Same result. A coincidence was possible. A pattern felt more likely. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. The screen showed an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I answered. A man's voice came through the speaker. Calm. Professional. He refused to give his name. He only asked one question. Did you find Harold's map? My pulse slowed instantly. Rain continued tapping against the windows. I looked toward the stack of documents. Who is this? I asked. Silence followed. Then the caller sighed. You are asking the right questions, he said. Just be careful who answers them. The line disconnected. I stared at the phone for several seconds. The call lasted less than a minute. Yet it confirmed something important. Other people knew about the map. Other people knew I was looking. The next morning, I changed my approach. Up to that point, I had been chasing records. Now I wanted witnesses. People remember things that paperwork forgets. I started with homeowners from the original phase of the neighborhood. Not the newer sections. The beginning. One conversation led to another. Several residents remembered hearing about survey disagreements years ago. Most details were fuzzy. Memories fade. But certain themes repeated. Delays. Meetings. Arguments. Missing approvals. One elderly homeowner remembered a heated discussion about expansion boundaries at a community gathering nearly 2 decades earlier. Another remembered contractors waiting months for a review that never seemed to finish. Small pieces. Useful pieces. Then Walter called just before sunset. His voice sounded different. More urgent. Wind crackled through the phone line. He had found something in his garage. Something he forgot he still had. An old neighborhood newsletter from the year the biggest expansion began. And according to Walter, one article inside mentioned Harold Mercer by name. The article mentioned Harold Mercer by name. I met Walter at his house less than an hour later. The neighborhood sat quiet beneath the fading orange light. Porch lamps glowed along the sidewalks. A lawn sprinkler clicked somewhere across the street. Walter led me into his garage without wasting time. Dust floated through the beam of a single work light. Cardboard boxes lined the walls. Old tools hung from pegboards. The place smelled like motor oil and cedar. Walter pulled a yellowed newsletter from a plastic storage bin and handed it to me carefully. The paper felt fragile. The headline itself was not remarkable. Community Expansion Update. But halfway down the page, a short paragraph stopped me cold. Harold Mercer had publicly requested additional review before the next expansion phase. The article described it as a routine disagreement. Nothing dramatic. Nothing controversial. Yet the date printed beside it matched the same period as the disputed review packet. My eyes moved farther down the page. Then I noticed something else. A photograph. Several people stood together during a community planning meeting. One of them was a much younger Linda Crawford. Another appeared to be Harold Mercer. The image was grainy, but the faces were clear enough. Walter watched me study the page. That photograph disappeared from later newsletters, he said quietly. Another detail. Another missing piece. I photographed every page before returning home. The ranch house felt unusually quiet that night. Wind rattled the windows. The clock above the kitchen doorway ticked steadily. I spread the newsletter beside Harold's map, Frank's records, and the county files. Then I started comparing dates again. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Every warning appeared before a major expansion. Every concern appeared before new construction. Every unresolved review appeared before another section of neighborhood was added. Yet somehow the expansion always moved forward. Around midnight, I finally found what I had been missing. Not a document, not a map, a timeline gap. Nearly 7 months of records seemed unusually thin. Meeting minutes vanished. Correspondence vanished. Review notes vanished. Activity continued. Documentation did not. I stared at the empty stretch of dates for several minutes. The absence felt louder than the records themselves. Then my phone buzzed. An email notification appeared on the screen. Sender unknown. No subject line. No message. Only one attachment. I opened it carefully. A scanned meeting agenda appeared. The date matched the missing 7-month period exactly. Several agenda items had been crossed out by hand. One line near the bottom was highlighted. Boundary verification discussion. Cancelled. My pulse slowed. Then I noticed another note written in the margin. Present, Elsie. The initials could have meant many things. Yet I already suspected otherwise. The next morning brought even more movement. Residents started contacting me directly. Word had spread. Some wanted answers. Others wanted reassurance. A few simply wanted to understand what was happening. One homeowner invited me onto his porch and showed me purchase paperwork from nearly 20 years earlier. Another shared correspondence from an old builder. None of it solved the mystery completely, but each conversation added another piece. By late afternoon, something had changed inside Oak Ridge. Curiosity was replacing certainty. Questions were replacing assumptions. People who had trusted the same story for decades were starting to look closer. Then Linda announced a special community presentation scheduled for the following week. According to the notice, she intended to settle the ownership issue once and for all. The flyer appeared on every bulletin board, every mailbox, every neighborhood website. Her confidence seemed stronger than ever. That surprised me, because by then I knew something she did not. Hidden inside Harold Mercer's envelope had been a second folded page, and I had only just started reading it. The second folded page looked ordinary at first. One sheet of paper, typed text, a few handwritten notes in the margin. Yet within 30 seconds I understood why Harold Mercer sealed it inside a separate envelope. The document was a summary, not a survey, not a map. A summary of unresolved concerns prepared before the largest expansion phase ever moved forward. I sat at my dining table beneath the yellow glow of a lamp while the ranch house settled into silence around me. Wind brushed against the windows. The smell of coffee drifted through the room. My eyes moved line by line across the page. Several concerns appeared exactly where I expected them. Boundary alignment, parcel verification, review discrepancies. Then I reached the final section. That was where everything changed. Harold had listed the original reference coordinates used before later revisions. I immediately compared them to the modern maps spread across the table. My pulse slowed. The coordinates matched the original ranch boundary almost perfectly. Not the revised one. Not the neighborhood version. The original one. I checked again. Then a third time. Same result. For nearly 20 years, every warning pointed back to the same location. The next few days passed quickly. Residents talked. Rumors spread. More people started asking questions. Several homeowners contacted me directly. Others simply watched from a distance. The certainty that once surrounded Oak Ridge Meadows was fading. The special community presentation became the only thing anyone discussed. Flyers appeared everywhere. Mailboxes, bulletin boards, community websites. Linda promised answers. Linda promised clarity. Linda promised final proof. The evening finally arrived. Cars packed the clubhouse parking lot long before sunset. Residents filled every chair inside. People stood along walls. Some remained outside, near open windows. The room smelled like coffee and fresh paper. Ceiling fans turned slowly overhead. A projector screen glowed at the front. Linda stood beside it wearing the same calm confidence she always carried. Board members sat nearby. Several local officials occupied seats near the front. Walter sat 2 rows behind me. We exchanged a brief nod. Nothing more. The room gradually quieted. Then Linda began. She presented neighborhood history, expansion timelines, development records, community achievements. Applause followed several slides. She looked completely comfortable. Every answer seemed prepared. Every statement seemed polished. Then she displayed the same revised map I had seen before. The same map, missing the critical boundary line. My attention sharpened immediately. Linda pointed toward the expansion phases and described them as properly reviewed, properly approved, properly documented. Several residents nodded. Others looked uncertain. Then she invited questions. Silence lasted only a moment. A homeowner near the front raised his hand. Another followed. Then another. Questions came from every direction. Historical reviews. Boundary concerns. Survey discrepancies. Missing records. Linda answered carefully. But something had changed. The room no longer accepted every answer automatically. Curiosity had replaced trust. Eventually, all eyes shifted toward me. I stood slowly. Papers rustled. Chairs creaked. The projector fan hummed overhead. I carried a single folder to the front of the room. Nothing dramatic. Nothing theatrical. Just documents. Real documents. I placed Harold Mercer's summary beside the projector. Then Frank Delaney's review records. Then the newsletter. Then the survey marker photographs. One by one, the room grew quieter with each page. I explained the timeline. The missing review period. The unresolved concerns. The repeated warnings. No accusations. No speeches. Just dates and records. Then I projected Harold's original coordinate summary onto the screen. Several residents leaned forward immediately. A county official sitting near the aisle adjusted his glasses and studied the page closely. Another official requested a copy. Then I displayed the original boundary map. The complete version. The version showing the line that never appeared on Linda's presentation. Nobody spoke. Linda looked toward the screen. Then toward the county officials. Then back toward the screen again. For the first time since I met her, she seemed unsure what came next. Then someone near the front asked a question nobody had asked before. The question came from a woman sitting near the center aisle. Her voice was steady, not angry, not emotional, just direct. If the original boundary was never changed properly, then what boundary are we actually using? The room fell silent again. Even the projector seemed louder. Linda looked toward the county officials. The county officials looked back at the screen. Nobody answered immediately. That hesitation told everyone more than any speech could. I remained standing beside the projector while the original map glowed across the wall. The red boundary line cut through the image with uncomfortable clarity. Several residents leaned toward each other and whispered. Papers rustled. Someone dropped a pen. The atmosphere had shifted completely. This was no longer a debate between me and the HOA. It had become a question about the records themselves. One of the county officials finally stood and approached the screen. He studied Harold Mercer's summary, then Frank Delaney's review documents, then the coordinate records. His finger followed several lines across the map. The room watched every movement. After a long minute, he turned toward the audience. He explained that the documents raised legitimate questions requiring formal review. He chose his words carefully, very carefully, yet the effect was immediate. People heard what mattered. The issue was real. Linda attempted to regain control of the meeting. She returned to the podium and emphasized that homeowners still owned their homes and that nobody was being removed from the neighborhood. That helped calm the room somewhat. Several people nodded. Others looked relieved. But the deeper question remained unresolved. How had the discrepancy survived for so many years? The meeting continued for nearly another hour. Residents asked questions faster than answers could be given. Expansion approvals. Survey reviews. Missing records. Historical decisions. The same themes kept returning. Linda answered some. Deferred others. A few questions she could not answer at all. For the first time since I entered Oak Ridge Meadows, her confidence seemed strained. Nothing dramatic. Just small pauses. Slight hesitations. Tiny cracks in a story that had remained unchanged for decades. By the time the meeting ended, groups formed throughout the parking lot. Conversations stretched beneath the streetlights. Car engines remained off, while people talked beside open doors. The smell of warm pavement lingered in the night air. Walter joined me near my truck. He looked toward the clubhouse entrance where board members were leaving through a side door. That went differently than they expected, he said quietly. I nodded. Across the lot, several residents were already exchanging copies of photographs taken during the meeting. Information was moving now. Fast. Over the next 2 weeks, the county initiated a formal records review. Surveyors revisited archived files. Historical plats resurfaced. More witnesses came forward. Not dramatic revelations. Just pieces. Additional pieces. Each one filling gaps that had remained empty for years. The review eventually reached the same conclusion Harold Mercer had feared decades earlier. The original boundary verification process had never been fully completed before later expansion phases moved forward. The finding did not erase homes. It did not erase families. It did not erase the neighborhood, but it changed how everyone understood the land beneath it. Several board members resigned during the review process. Others declined re-election. Linda remained for a short time longer, though she appeared less frequently in public meetings. The certainty that once defined Oak Ridge Meadows had disappeared. In its place came something healthier. Questions, transparency, verification. One evening, as the final review report circulated among residents, a county representative called my ranch house with an update. The county representative called just after sunset. I stood on the ranch house porch watching the last light fade across the hills while crickets filled the evening air. The smell of cedar drifted through the breeze. His voice sounded calm, professional, measured. After months of reviews, surveys, interviews, and records analysis, the county had completed its findings. I listened without interrupting. The final report confirmed what the original documents, survey markers, and historical records had been pointing toward all along. The unresolved boundary review from decades earlier had never been properly completed before later expansion phases moved forward. No dramatic conspiracy. No secret takeover, just a chain of assumptions built on an unfinished process. Yet those assumptions shaped an entire community for years. The representative explained that corrective measures would focus on documentation, easements, access agreements, and future oversight. Homeowners would keep their homes. Families would keep their neighborhoods. But the historical record would finally reflect reality. When the call ended, I remained on the porch for several minutes. The sky above the pasture had turned deep blue. A distant owl called from somewhere near the tree line. For the first time since this began, the noise surrounding the situation seemed to disappear. Over the following weeks, changes happened gradually. New county maps were issued. Historical records were updated. Survey references were corrected. Public meetings became less emotional and more practical. Residents wanted solutions now. Not arguments. Not rumors. Solutions. Walter and I spoke several times during that period. He seemed relieved more than anything else. Many longtime residents felt the same way. They were not angry about learning the truth. They were tired of uncertainty. The final report gave them something solid again. Facts, clarity, closure. Linda Crawford eventually stepped away from HOA leadership. There was no dramatic scene, no public confrontation. At one meeting, she simply announced her decision and thanked the community for years of service. Some residents applauded. Others remained quiet. Most seemed ready to move forward. I watched from the back of the room and felt no satisfaction in her departure. The real issue had never been winning against a person. It had been understanding what actually happened. Several months later, I drove my ATV across the ranch on a cool autumn morning. Frost still clung to patches of grass beneath the oak trees. The engine hummed softly beneath me. I followed the same route that had led me to the neighborhood the first time. The same pasture, the same rise in the terrain, the same stretch of land where confusion had started. When I reached the edge of Oak Ridge Meadows, everything looked peaceful. Children waited for a school bus. Neighbors waved to each other. Lawn crews worked along the sidewalks. Life continued. It always had. I stopped beside the survey marker near the retention pond, the one hidden beneath landscaping for years. The metal cap caught the morning sunlight. Simple, unremarkable. Yet that small marker had connected the entire story. I looked beyond it toward the homes, the streets, and the open ranchland stretching toward the horizon. The land had never changed. The marker had never moved. The original records had been there all along. What changed was the story people believed about them. A cold breeze crossed the water. Ducks drifted quietly across the pond. I started the ATV and turned back toward the ridge overlooking the ranch. From there, I could see nearly everything. Open pasture, tree lines, roads, homes, history. The morning sun climbed higher above the horizon as I sat there listening to the wind move through the grass.